Ahead on Straight Talk, one of Oregon's most vocal critics of the Trump administration.
What is the plan?
Oregon Senator Ron Wyden on his efforts to push back.
There is no clear message of how the tariffs were determined, what they're supposed to accomplish, how long they'll be in place,
and how the five-term senator is trying to get his priorities through a Republican-controlled Senate.
and have us on a bipartisan basis do our work.
From preserving Social Security and Medicaid benefits for Oregonians,
Without adequate reimbursement, care becomes harder to provide.
to bolstering support for rural education and wildfire prevention.
So I think those NOAA cuts are a huge mistake, and I'm going to do my best to reverse them.
Right now on Straight Talk. Hello, and thanks so much for joining us here on Straight Talk. I'm Stephanie Domarat. Now, this week we are joined by U.S. Senator Ron Wyden. Senator Wyden has been representing Oregon in the U.S. Senate since 1996 after serving for several years in the U.S. House of Representatives. We'll tackle a wide range of subjects today, including changes to Medicaid, the debate surrounding the Epstein files, and the impact of President Trump's tariff policies. Senator Wyden, thank you so much for coming in today. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Before we get started, I want to let viewers know that we are recording this on Friday afternoon. Things always change, sometimes minute by minute, so we just want to let you know that's where we are right now. First, though, I want to start with some big news that happened this week. The Trailblazers tentatively being sold to a new owner. I read in the Oregonian that you had some calls this week from people with the NBA and maybe the new owner, and you were literally yelling in your house on Tuesday night. Is that right?
Well, it's a great week to be a Blazer fan. Now, Adam Silver, who runs the NBA, always emphasizes that there is a process, and that will go forward now. But certainly it was exciting to get those calls. And, the reality is we Oregonians remember what happened in Seattle, where they lost their team basically right out from their feet. And so, we Blazer fans, we've got a bottom line. Every criteria, 1, 2, and 3, is about keeping the team in Portland.
I wanted to ask you, did he say anything about that?
He certainly made it clear he was very excited about the prospect, and he was very much aware of the kind of viewpoint that we have here, and that what we feel most strongly about is keeping the team.
I hope so. A lot of people are really hoping for that. I want to talk about something that's been really important to you since you have served. You continue to do 36 town halls in each of Oregon's counties each year. Why is that so central to the way that you serve, and what have you been hearing most urgently from people right now?
It's central to me because so many folks believe the system is rigged, that it's just about lobbyists and members of Congress on Saturdays just go play golf and all that kind of thing with lobbyists and campaign fundraising and the like. And what I did, nobody had ever done in Oregon government before. I said, I'm going to throw open the doors. I'll be in every county every week. I don't make speeches, no teleprompters. I'll be in like 8 communities just over the next week. And sometimes, young people come up to me and say, I'm trying to keep up with you. And it's all about making sure that people are a little bit less frustrated about government. And that is being there, responding to their questions.
It's a big state, so it's a feat, especially for you to do that every year. I want to ask you something that's come up in both parties. It's getting a lot of talk and a lot of attention. Washington Representative Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez recently pushed for a cognitive acuity standard in Congress. It was rejected. She said that 90% of her respondents in her newsletter supported this. So I wonder, do you support any version of this idea of cognitive testing for this in Congress?
I think it is an unusual one. I think, for example, I've had 1,100 town hall meetings. They're unscripted. Most of what goes on in politics is people hand out pieces of paper and somebody reads it. Anybody who comes to one of my town hall meetings can make a judgment about me. And I think they're going to say, this guy's got the energy, he's on top of it.
Well, and I wanted to give you that opportunity because I know in Wasco, there was someone who asked about that because you do plan to run for re-election in 2020.
Well, let's be clear about what happened. I was asked again and again about politics, and I said, I'm focused on one thing, and that's now. The best politics is to get things done. And eventually a journalist said, well, what's going to happen down the road? And I said, one sentence, I plan to run.
Okay, so right now you do plan to run in 2028, obviously 3
What
years.
I'm focused on is the topics we're going to talk about here. In a minute, I'm sure we'll talk about healthcare, taxes. I want working people to get a fair shake and our small businesses. That's what I'm focused on. And I always say the best politics is to get results for Oregonians.
So I want to ask, looking ahead, as we mentioned, to 2026, Republicans, of course, now hold control of both chambers of Congress, of the White House. What concrete shifts or message changes or policy do you think that Democratic leaders or candidates need to target the working class again?
Most important thing for Democrats is get out and listen to people who don't necessarily agree with you. That's why I go to all these counties. I'm going to counties where Donald Trump got 70% of the vote. And what I'm trying to do is show respect for those people, respect for their communities. And I think that too often people just say, they don't agree with me, I'm not going there. But I will tell you, for example, on health care in rural Oregon, those folks are about to get hit by a wrecking ball. And that's the Trump health care proposal. And half of those communities depend on Medicaid. And they're going to get clobbered. And I went out there, I talked to those people, and I think, again, those are the kinds of politics that people really say, we want to hear about this. I didn't stand up and say, let's talk about 26 and 28 and such. I said, let's talk about the fact that we're worried that come October, people are going to get premium notices again. And I think they're going to get sticker shock. And I told them I'm going to be taking on the insurance companies and working to protect them.
Do you think the Democratic Party as a whole right now has work to do, though, to kind of reinvigorate the working class that maybe went more moderate?
No question about it. Mm-hmm. And that's why when I go to those rural communities where a lot of Democrats haven't been to listen, I always make sure that the second word is bill. Might be medical bill, might be energy bill, might be housing bill. But remember, Donald Trump told everybody he was going to hold their costs down. He stood in grocery stores and the like, and after 10 days or so, he gave up. And when I go out there and I talk about taking on insurance companies and ending the ripoffs in the tax code in order to put money in people's pocket, people say, I hadn't heard anybody say that before. And I don't ask them how they're going to vote. I say, let's work together.
Looking ahead to 2028, we're talking about President Trump, of course, but also, the race for the seat for presidency. There's been some buzz about presidential contenders that would run in the Democratic Party. I want to ask you, are any of those people your favorites? Do you have any contenders that are standing out for you?
I will tell you, I think it's way, way, way away. And what I tell Democrats and what I do, and I always talk to young people, we have programs called Listening to the Future, is get out there and listen to people. Don't just take a minute and then start talking again. Listen to them. Make sure that they feel, okay, I may not agree with this person about everything, but Ron Wyden has showed up more than 1,100 times. Nobody's ever done that. And the meetings are unscripted. People can ask anything they want. I think that's the best kind of approach.
Do you think that other Democrats around the country should be doing more of that?
Absolutely, and I think to not do it means that you're not in touch.
I want to ask you one more time, is there anyone that you think stands out for the presidential race? Kamala, Gavin Newsom, California, or any of these names kind of standing out for you?
I think to start making choices today when we haven't even hit the crucial 2026 election is pretty absurd.
Okay, well, let's talk about some policy and legislation. Let's turn to international news, to the war in Gaza. So you, Senator Merkley, and many of your Democratic senators have pressed the administration for more humanitarian aid in Gaza. Just weeks ago, Senator Bernie Sanders introduced a resolution to stop U.S. arms sales to Israel amid starvation of civilians, as you've said and know about, sadly, in Gaza. Your Oregon colleague, Senator Merkley, voted yes on that. I believe you voted against it, so just wondering why that is.
Well, first of all, the humanitarian situation there is horrifying. And I'm a very strong supporter of doing everything possible, which means a lot more than is being done today, in order to address this. So let's start with the humanitarian situation. And I'm a member of the Intelligence Committee. Sometimes my older child calls it the so-called Intelligence Committee. And seriously, what I'm working on now is to change the direction on the ground, which is so crucial when you see all this suffering. And what I'm looking at is imposing sanctions on those on the ground who are not supportive of the humanitarian process and are holding it back. I think that's one way to make a major change in direction. Now, with respect to Israel, Israel has hostile enemies nearby in Iran and their proxies and the like. But these are two major issues. I think Bibi Netanyahu is only interested in himself, and I think that's a major problem. And I think you deal with the humanitarian issue immediately because of the suffering, and I think there ought to be penalties and sanctions for those on the ground who are obstructing the assistance of humanitarian aid.
Do you mean for Israel or those involved?
Anyone.
And so is that why you voted no on that resolution?
I voted because I believe that humanitarian aid, and what I'm talking about, is not inconsistent with trying to make sure that Israel can survive. Israel has hostile neighbors. Let's make sure that Israel can survive, but I don't take a backseat to anyone in terms of more generous humanitarian aid, and I want to penalize people who obstruct the ability to get it.
Last month, you invited Trump's border chief, Tom Homan, to Portland for a public immigration discussion. Where were you able to connect with him, and where does that stand?
I just feel when there are important topics and there are important guests coming to our city, I'll do everything I can to make sure those voices are heard, so we'll see what he does. I made it clear that he'd be welcome to a meeting.
Did you hear anything from him?
No.
Okay. Are you going to keep pushing on that one?
Our doors are open. It's pretty clear how I feel.
I want to speak more on immigration. What are you hearing actually right now from constituents about these stepped-up immigration raids that we're seeing, deportations, including reports of increased deportations in Oregon, and also what is Congress's role in this? Do you think?
Well, Congress's role, and we almost had a bill last year at the end of 2024. A conservative, James Lankford, Chris Murphy, a liberal, had a very good bill, and the Trump people, Donald Trump himself, didn't want it. So what I think we have to recognize now is we were told in the campaign, if someone was a criminal or running a drug cartel or a terrorist and the like, they didn't get, special treatment in one of these pieces of legislation. But what's going on now is innocent people are being dragged off these streets. And that's not what America is about. America is about due process, and everybody has constitutional rights. And I want to make sure that those are protected, as well as more being done to keep our communities safe from people who are actually criminals.
President Trump, of course, campaigned on deporting those immigrants, ending illegal immigration. We're now seeing these goals being carried out right now. But for those who do support his goals, do you think there is a realistic path for people to pursue, citizenship in a legal way?
Not today, but today I think you need a combination of smarter policies at the border, and I voted for enormous sums of money, for that, while making it clear that you believe in what was said in the campaign, which is we are not going to allow people who are dangerous criminals to use these immigration laws to hurt other people as well, but we are going to make sure that constitutional rights for law-abiding people are being met, and we're not seeing that. We live in Southeast Portland, and people always come up to me, they're holding forms, and they're just petrified that they're going to be abused for doing nothing wrong. That's what they say, did nothing wrong.
What do you see as Congress's role in this right now? How can they play a role?
What I'd like to do is go back to something resembling the bipartisan proposal that came up in 2024. You had a strong conservative, James Lankford, with Chris Murphy, a strong liberal, and I think it would have struck a balance between improving border security, which I think needs to be done. The border policy is broken, and at the same time not rounding people up indiscriminately and violating their rights when they're innocent.
Senator Wyden, thank you for being here. We are going to take a quick break now, but we will come back with more of our conversation with U.S. Senator Ron Wyden, including his thoughts on changes to Medicaid eligibility and the push to make Jeffrey Epstein files public. Stay with us. And welcome back to Straight Talk. Thanks for joining us. We are continuing our conversation with U.S. Senator Ron Wyden. Senator Wyden, thank you again for being here today.
Thank you.
I want to dive right back into it, including what we're seeing with the changes in Medicaid for people. So Oregon providers and Oregonians right now are bracing for these Medicaid reductions that we are expecting tied to the one big beautiful bill by President Trump and the Republicans in Congress. What are you seeing right now or hearing from people about these changes?
Well, people are asking me questions about what I have said about what's coming. For example, the Republicans have been very clever. They wrote a bill that cut a lot of benefits but said it doesn't apply until after the 2026 election. What is going to apply is this fall, we're going to start seeing cost shifting. And people are going to get insurance notices. They're going to find it harder to get services at the hospital. They're going to find it harder to get doctors. Around my corner in southeast Portland, there's an advertisement at one of the bus queues where everybody stands that says, if you want to get a medical job in British Columbia, come because we're not going to be cutting health care like Oregon is. So 15 million people nationally are going to lose coverage, and to a great extent they're going to lose it because of all the red tape and the bureaucracy. The Trump people say, oh, we're putting in these new kinds of standards and the like, but most people who don't have health care are working or they're caregivers and the like, and this is going to tie real bureaucratic knots out there for people who are eligible and just want to get decent health care.
And speaking of those, basically they are requirements, right, that they're putting in place for the Medicaid benefits, as you mentioned.
They're bureaucracy requirements. They're claiming that, oh, we're going to get all these people, working who really aren't and are sitting on the couch. Well, that's why I said, more than half of the people we're talking about here are people who work for small businesses. They might be caregivers and the like. I've never seen bureaucracy like this that's out there for one reason, and that's to keep eligible people who need health care from getting it.
I want to ask about that, though. Do you have any, do you support any sort of requirement for people who are on Medicaid? And I mean, I do want to say for people who aren't familiar, in the bill, the requirements would be that they, every 6 months, have to show that they're working or going to school or volunteering at least 80 hours a month. So that is
what I support is going after rip-offs that really amount to fraud. For example, in Medicare, there's a process, for example, of upcoding. And what goes on is the insurance companies take somebody who has a modest condition, and because they want to make a lot of money off taxpayers, they upcode, and they say this is a much more involved procedure. I'm working in a bipartisan way. Senator Merkley has been interested. Republicans have been interested. We could save billions of dollars with a B if we stopped upcoding, and it amounts to fraud, and that's where I think we ought to go to save money.
So you don't support any sort of requirement for Medicaid benefits?
Anybody who's breaking the rules, cheating, engaged in fraud, but remember the Republicans said we're only going to go after fraudsters and rip-off artists, and the government auditors said there really wasn't much fraud, and we ought to root that out. And I had a press conference with my Democratic colleagues to talk about ways we could do that. But the main thing they said is 15 million people are going to lose coverage.
So you support Medicaid and the requirements and the setup as the way it is right now, is what you're saying?
No, I just gave you an example of where we ought to go, which is to cut billions of dollars of fraudulent activity through something called upcoding.
Okay.
And if you hear that word, it's really synonymous with fraud, because instead of getting a modest payment for a modest condition, the insurance companies upcoded into, oh, this is a huge problem, we need big chunks of money, and now Democrats and Republicans, because I and others have been speaking out about it, will finally go after it.
Okay, we'll see. Should we expect legislation on that anytime soon?
We already have several bills, but I'm the point person for the Democrats, and I'm going to be working with Democrats and Republicans to block upcoding, which is a really serious process that I think is fraud.
What do you think about the access for people who live in rural areas as far as healthcare access?
I'm so glad you asked about it, because I just came from 5 rural town meetings, and people there are going to get clobbered. And they recognize already, because they have difficulty getting doctors and physician assistants and others. They have difficulty getting affordable medicines and the like. I just feel, and that's why I went out there, that I'm trying to get everybody ready and give everybody our phone numbers so that we can help cut through the red tape to the greatest extent possible so they get service.
I want to ask, we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to move on to the Justice Department. You've been pushing, you've been very vocal for the Justice Department to release Jeffrey Epstein-related records. Where does that stand now?
We're pushing particularly the Treasury Department, because the Treasury Department is the department where you can follow the money. And Jeffrey Epstein was a substitute high school teacher. Wasn't somebody with a big job. And he basically generated hundreds of millions, in fact, billions, in order to run a global sex trafficking network. And he did it because a lot of powerful people looked away. You know, banks, for example. The Treasury Department has documents which indicate, you know, when there's a potential problem. They all looked away. And what I'm doing now is making sure that we get all of the, you know, agencies. The Internal Revenue Service, for example, never audited, you know, Epstein. And here's a guy who's making extraordinary sums of money, and he's moving it through banks that now we've seen are Russian banks, and God only knows, you know, what they've done in terms of illicit activity. And I want to make sure that all the facts come out for two reasons. Number one, this is a horrible offense, you know, sex trafficking. Number two, it's not blue and red. And then on top of that, I want to have reforms of things like banks and the tax rules and the like, so this never happens again.
We only have a few minutes left, as I mentioned, so I want to ask you big picture. You've been in the Senate for basically almost 30 years. How has partisanship changed in that time, and is there still opportunity for bipartisanship?
There definitely is, and I wrote a book recently called It Takes Chutzpah, which is Yiddish for grit and determination. And number one, I said, I will work with anybody who wants to do the right thing, and I'm going to oppose anybody who doesn't want to do the right thing. You asked me about health care. I gave you an example where you could save enormous sums of money where, in effect, the insurance companies were engaged in something that's close to fraud. That's an example of how I work together. And just about a week or so ago, I went with Senator Lisa Murkowski, Republican of Alaska. We went to Canada because we're going to work together on dealing with these tariff, you know, policies. And I'll speak for myself. These tariffs or taxes, they're clobbering our small business people, and we want to get rid of them.
Do you feel like things have changed over the last 30 years as far as partisanship, or are we kind of where we've always been?
No, I think it is particularly challenging now, and that's why I'm doing things that are very different than basically you see in most of government. For example, hardly anybody in government has done anything like 1,120 town hall meetings that are open to all. In fact, we talked about it during the break. People come with a teleprompter, they read their teleprompter and go home. That's not what I do. And what I'm trying to do is show that I'll work with anybody to do the right thing, whether it's hold down healthcare costs, whether it's protecting small business people from these tariffs, because that's what I think public service is all about. I'm a first-generation Jewish kid. I never thought I'd have these kinds of opportunities for public service, and I put the focus on trying to do the right thing. And I always tell young people, doing the right thing and helping people will always be the best politics.
And finally, we just have 30 seconds, but quickly, what is giving you hope right now, Senator Wyden?
Trailblazers coming to get real protection, and we can know that they're going to stay in Portland
And
forever.
WNBA, right? Good time to love basketball here.
Kathy Engelbert came when I asked in 2023. I've spent a lot of time on these issues because sports is also big business in Oregon.
I love it. Senator Wyden, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate your time. And thank you so much for watching today. If you have an idea, a person you'd like us to interview here on Straight Talk, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at straighttalk@kgw.com on your screen there. And a reminder that you can stream Straight Talk on your own schedule anytime. You can download the free KGW Plus app, available now on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you back here next week.